You know what I think a lot of contractors are feeling right now, but not saying out loud? I'm working too hard for what I'm actually making. And honestly, that feeling is usually trying to tell you something very important because most business owners I talk to, they're not lazy. They're not sitting around twiddling their thumbs doing nothing. They're not avoiding work and they're not unwilling to grind. Actually, most contractors work harder than almost anybody that I know. They're carrying that pressure constantly. They're answering calls after hours. They're thinking about jobs at dinner if they take dinner. They're waking up in the middle of the night remembering something they forgot to do. They're handling customers, they're handling employees, they're handling vendors. They're thinking about cash flow and scheduling and problems and callbacks and estimates and equipment issues. And somehow they're supposed to hold all of that together while also trying to grow a business. Most business owners I talk to are busy. They're booked out, they've got a great reputation, they're doing everything right. But when they actually sit down and look at their numbers, something doesn't quite add up. The profit doesn't match the effort, and it's usually not a sales problem. It's a visibility problem. I'm Shannon Howard. I work with HVAC owners, electricians, plumbers, and contractors to uncover hidden profit, fix those leaks, and help you keep more of what you earn. This is Profit Isn't an Accident. That's a lot. And honestly, I think sometimes contractors are so used to carrying pressure that they stop realizing just how heavy it actually all is. They normalize it. They tell themselves this is just part of the business. This is just the grind. This is just what success requires. But I want to challenge that today because sometimes what feels like the grind is actually a broken business. The model underneath the surface is broken and you don't see it. And one of the biggest things that's quietly breaking businesses right now is pricing. Not because people are stupid, not because they don't care, not because they're bad at business. Usually it's because they built pricing from survival instead of strategy. And that creates a business that looks successful from the outside, but feels extremely exhausting behind the scenes. And honestly, that disconnect right there is becoming incredibly common these days. Because from the outside, again, a lot of the businesses look like they're doing well. There's work, there's movement, there's revenue, there's activity. But internally, the owner constantly feels pressure and they can't explain why. They just know that something feels tight. And maybe you know exactly what I'm talking about right now. Maybe you've looked around before and thought, with how hard I'm working, this should feel better than it does. That thought right there, that's usually the beginning of an awareness. And awareness really does matter because once you finally start seeing the real issue, you can actually begin to fix it. But here's the problem. Most contractors think that their issue is not enough work. So naturally, their solution becomes more work. More leads, more jobs, more estimates, more volume. And honestly, that does sound logical at first because if money feels tight, you assume you need more money coming in. But sometimes, and actually a lot of the time I see, more jobs just create more pressure, right? And that is the part that people don't understand until they're already at that state of overwhelm. Because if your pricing structure underneath your business is weak, I like to call this a very weak foundation, then more work often magnifies the pain instead of solving it. So let me say this another way because this really does matter. If your margins are weak, more volume just means more labor, more stress, more overhead, more moving pieces, more opportunities for mistakes. without enough profit underneath to support it. And eventually the business just starts to feel unbelievably heavy. Again, it's not because you're failing, but because the structure underneath the business cannot properly support the growth that's happening on top of it. And honestly, I think a lot of contractors are living in this exact reality right now, right? They're busy constantly, but somehow still anxious financially. They're doing real revenue, but they're still feeling the pressure. They're growing externally, but internally they feel as though they're barely keeping up. And one of the biggest reasons this happens is pricing. Now, let's talk honestly about how contractors usually price work, because this part really is important. So most business owners don't intentionally underprice. Actually, most of the time it starts with very good intentions. You want to win the job, you want to keep people busy, you want to build this momentum, you want happy customers, you want your reputation to be growing, right? You want to be spoken about in rooms that you're not in. And honestly, those are not bad goals. But somewhere along the line, a dangerous question starts pricing decisions, and it's driving those decisions in a negative way. What do I think they'll say yes to? And listen carefully, that question alone has probably cost contractors millions of dollars collectively, because pricing should not be built around fear or urgency or, desperation or approval. Pricing should be built around your actual numbers, your actual costs, the actual sustainability of your business. But fear-based pricing is extremely common in the trades. And it usually sounds like this. I know someone else might do it cheaper. I don't want to scare them away with my price. I'll make it up later. We'll get them on volume. And honestly, the I'll make it up later mindset destroys margins quietly over time, because later rarely ever comes. Instead, what usually happens is you're staying busy, you're staying stressed, you're staying under pressure, and eventually your business depends on that nonstop activity just to stay afloat. That's freaking exhausting. And I think this is the part that most people don't talk about enough. Underpricing does not just affect your bank account. It affects your entire life. Because when your margins are weak, everything else feels fragile. A slow week feels scarier. A mistake hurts more. Payroll creates more anxiety for you. Unexpected expenses that just randomly appear, they feel heavier, right? You have that lump in your throat. You carry more stress at home and you think about money more, which means that you're losing that mental clarity. And honestly, thin margins create emotionally exhausted business owners, and that is real. Now, let's make this practical for a second, because I want you to really see how this happens. So let's say you quote a job for $15K. In your mind, you're thinking, okay, materials are covered. Labor should be covered. We should make money on this. But what actually happens is the crew takes longer than expected. There's possibly a delay. Maybe you're waiting on parts, right? Material prices are shifting slightly. Hello, economy. Someone makes a mistake. There's extra communication time. You spend hours estimating and managing behind the scenes that nobody accounts for. Somebody has to go back out. The customer changes something halfway through. And suddenly that good job, maybe even that great job, didn't actually produce much profit. Now, here's the dangerous part. One job like that, not catastrophic, but 50 jobs like that, or 100 jobs like that, or a whole year of jobs like that, that quietly destroys profitability. And most business owners don't immediately realize how much money is leaking because revenue hides the issue. And that's one of the biggest things contractors need to understand. Revenue hides problems really freaking well because money is coming in. The business looks active. Your schedule is full, but activity is not the same thing as profitability. And honestly, I think contractors confuse those two things consistently. Busy does not equal profitable. Revenue does not equal healthy. Growth does not automatically equal success. And sometimes the businesses doing the most work are actually under the most pressure financially because they built growth on weak margins, and weak margins create heavy businesses. Now let's talk about overhead for a second, because this is another place that contractors get crushed quietly. As businesses grow, overhead grows too. We're talking more trucks, more payroll, more fuel, more insurance, more software, more management, more moving pieces. And here's the problem. Most business owners increase overhead way faster than they're increasing their pricing. So the business itself becomes more expensive to operate, but the jobs are not producing enough additional margin to support the increased cost structure. Now that gap, that's pressure. That's why some contractors feel like, you know what, we're making more revenue than ever. So why does this still feel tight? Because revenue growth without margin growth creates stress, not freedom. And honestly, that realization can hit hard emotionally, because a lot of contractors genuinely believe if we just get bigger, then things are gonna get easier. But growth magnifies structure. If your pricing structure is weak, growth usually magnifies that pain. And that's why some businesses grow rapidly and the owner somehow becomes more stressed, not less, because the business underneath it all was never healthy to begin with. Now, I want to say something important here. Good pricing is not greed. And I think contractors need to hear that more often. A lot of good people struggle emotionally with charging properly because they associate higher pricing with being unfair, being greedy, or taking advantage of people. But healthy pricing is what actually allows businesses to stay stable, to serve customers well, to hire good people and retain them, to reduce stress, to improve quality, and to create consistency. Weak pricing, it helps nobody long term, because eventually that weak pricing creates burnout and resentment and financial instability, poor service, constant scrambling, constant turnover in your employees. And honestly, a lot of contractors are way too hard on themselves when the real issue is simply that the business model underneath them is unhealthy. So if your business feels tight or stressful or heavy or financially inconsistent, I need you to seriously evaluate your pricing structure honestly, not emotionally, but objectively. Ask yourself, are your prices actually supporting your business, the overhead, the future, the growth, the breathing room, or are they simply helping you stay busy? Because those are two very different things. And listen, this matters deeply, because your business should not only look successful, it should feel successful too. You should feel clarity, confidence, stability, and breathing room, not constant financial anxiety. And once contractors finally understand that, everything around them starts changing. Because the businesses that truly do become profitable, they're not usually the ones working the hardest. They're the ones who finally start understanding their numbers clearly, and that's the shift. Now, profit should not be this thing that happens accidentally. It should be intentional, and it should be built into your business from the beginning. And once you finally understand that, right? Once you stop building a business powered entirely by effort, you start building one that's supported by actual structure. And in doing so, you can finally take a breath. I'll see you on the next episode. If this hit, there is a reason. Most businesses aren't broken. They just don't have clear visibility into where the money's actually going. So if you want help finding it, grab my free Profit Edge playbook or book a quick session with me. You'll find everything in the show notes. And if you haven't already, follow the show so you don't miss what's next.